Do you know the sound a table makes when it remembers the dead? It is not the scrape of chairs nor the clink of silver. It is a low, aching pulse, like wood breathing in the dark. That sound has haunted Georgia's soil since the autumn of 1847, when a feast was served that no man was meant to survive. The history books will not tell you this story. They will not tell you of the woman who moved like smoke through the house of Fair Hollow, unseen, uncounted, yet watching with eyes too old for her years. Her name was Harriet. To the white masters, she was nothing but another hand in the kitchen. To those who worked the fields, she was something else, something whispered about when the fires burned low. The night before Thanksgiving, Harriet was seen in the herb garden, not gathering sage for stuffing or rosemary for lamb, but bitter leaves the children were told never to touch. She crushed them between her fingers, releasing a scent so sharp it stung the throat. When a boy asked her what they were for, she did not answer. She only looked up at the moon, as though speaking to something older than the land itself. And when morning came, the house was alive with preparation. 12 chairs, 12 goblets, 12 linen napkins folded into little white shrouds, 12 men of power, judges, planters, merchants, one reverend, arrived with voices full of authority and laughter. They prayed over the table. They praised God for their fortunes, never once looking at the servant who filled their glasses. Harriet's hands moved steady, her face unreadable. Yet when the final dish was set before them, the sauce she alone had prepared, her hands trembled. Only once. The first man to fall was Judge Renner. His fork clattered against the wood. He tried to speak, but only a wet gurgle escaped. Then another coughed blood. Another collapsed. Laughter curdled into screams as poison bloomed in their veins. And Harriet? She did not flee. She did not hide. She stood at the doorway, her shadow long against the wall, whispering words no one else could hear. The land had been fed. The feast had only begun. Panic is a strange thing. It does not arrive all at once, but creeps like rot. At first the men thought it a trick of indigestion, a bad swallow of wine, but as one master clutched his chest, another's eyes rolled white, and a third began to vomit red. The air itself thickened. Their voices cracked into shrieks. Chairs scraped back in desperation. Boots thundered across the pine wood floor, but no door seemed wide enough to let them out. The Reverend cried for God's mercy, even as his own hands twitched like broken birds. The merchant gasped for his wife, though she was miles away. The planter begged his son to fetch water, forgetting his son had died years before. The illusion of their power crumbled faster than their bodies, and in that collapse, the silence of centuries seemed to answer back. And Harriet? She stood at the edge of the room, still as stone. The men called her name, not in gratitude but in accusation. Their words slurred, their eyes bulged, but she never flinched. Her gaze did not rest upon the living. It drifted instead to the 12 chairs, emptying one by one, her lips moving silently, as if counting, as if keeping score. The servants pressed against the walls, too terrified to breathe. A boy later swore that Harriet whispered to him as the judge fell, 12 chairs, but only one remembers. He was too young to understand what it meant, too young to grasp that this was no simple act of revenge. By dusk, half the men were gone. The survivors shivered like hunted animals, eyes darting from plate to cup, unable to tell where the poison still waited. Yet the table remained untouched by decay. The turkey still steamed, the sauce still glistened. It was as though the feast itself was preserved in some cruel reverence, waiting for its ritual to finish. No doctor would come, no prayer would take, and as the night deepened, the walls of Fair Hollow seemed to close in, wood groaning, windows trembling, shadows twisting in corners where no firelight reached. Some said it was the wind, others said it was the land remembering, but one thing was certain. Harriet was no longer just a servant in that house. She was the keeper of the table. By morning, Fair Hollow had changed. The air was sour with sickness, and the walls seemed swollen, as if the house itself had inhaled the night's horror and now held it close. 6 men lay dead, their bodies stiffening in the parlor. The rest trembled upstairs, their breath shallow, their eyes wide with terror that no wealth could shield them from. The surviving master, Elias Thatcher, prowled like a beast in a cage. His rage was louder than the groans of the dying. He struck servants for answers, demanded confessions, cursed God and man alike. His fury fell, of course, upon the kitchen. Where else could betrayal be born, if not from the hands that stirred the pots? The cook, Maybelle, wept until her apron was soaked through. Old Amos, the butler, stammered with a tongue too dry to form words. But Harriet? Harriet was found seated calmly on a stool behind the pantry door, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes closed. Not asleep, not afraid, just waiting. When they pulled her forward, she did not resist. When Elias struck her, his palm cracking across her face, she did not wince. Her cheek burned red, but her eyes stayed unbroken. They searched the kitchen, tearing apart cupboards, shattering jars, spilling herbs across the floor like entrails. And it was there, buried beneath flour sacks, that they found it. A book, small, leather-bound, pages warped with age and use. No English words stained its surface, only symbols, circles, and lines, twisting like roots through soil. Elias called it a witch's scripture. The Reverend, too weak to rise from his sickbed, gasped that it was worse, that it was not written for men at all. They hurled the book into the fire. Its pages hissed, curling into black ash. But Harriet did not flinch. She did not cry out in protest. She only watched the flames consume it with the faintest tilt of her head, like someone listening for a familiar tune. Later, in the Reverend's own journal, discovered where his body had slumped, an entry stood apart. Harriet spoke today, said the land remembers, that every stone has a mouth. I told her it was madness. She smiled and said, madness only frightens those who think they are sane. The men began to whisper what they dared not say aloud, that poison was not the only thing at work, that perhaps their feast had not been merely ruined, but invoked. They dragged Harriet from the kitchen at twilight. The sky above Fair Hollow was bruised with purple clouds, as though the heavens themselves had been struck. Survivors and servants alike gathered in the courtyard, their faces masks of fear and fury. It was Elias Thatcher who bound her wrists, his hands trembling, though he would never admit it. He swore he would end her, cleanse the house, and bury this curse beneath the soil. But Harriet walked steady, her bare feet silent against the dirt. The noose swung from the old oak, an oak that had seen too many ropes, too many bodies. Some swore the tree leaned forward that night, as though eager to taste her last breath. The Reverend, frail and fevered, tried to muster a prayer. His voice cracked, and his words broke into silence before they could finish. Harriet, however, did not need prayer. She raised her chin, her eyes catching the dim glow of lantern light, and she spoke for the first time to them all. You think this land is yours, she said, her voice calm, almost tender. But it has never been yours. It remembers. Every lash, every chain, every scream buried in its roots. You cannot poison a land already sick with your cruelty, but the land can poison you. The men jeered, though their laughter quivered. Elias pulled the rope tight around her neck, spitting in her face. You'll haunt us no more, he hissed. But Harriet smiled, not wide, not mocking, just the faint, unsettling curve of someone who knows a secret the rest will never grasp. Her last words were soft, nearly drowned by the wind. 12 chairs, 12 names, 1 table. When the feast begins again, so shall I. The stool was kicked away. Her body dropped. The rope snapped taut. Yet those who watched swore the oak groaned louder than the rope, and that her shadow, cast upon the ground, did not swing with her body. It lingered, still and separate, as two. How something of her had already stepped away. By dawn, Harriet's body was gone. The rope hung empty, and on the dining table of Fair Hollow, 12 goblets had been set again, though none could say who placed them there. After Harriet vanished, Fair Hollow never breathed the same. The house stood, but it was no longer a place of gatherings, of laughter, or of feasts. The fields went fallow, the walls grew damp, and one by one the servants slipped away into the night, refusing to remain beneath that roof. But the story of Harriet did not vanish with them. It spread. First, in whispers among the enslaved, hushed tales of a woman who had poisoned her masters and struck a deal with something older than God. They called her the keeper of the table. Some said she had not died at all, but stepped sideways into the shadowed cracks between worlds where ropes and bullets could not reach. Then the story bled into town. Hunters swore they saw light in the dining hall long after the estate was abandoned, candles burning where no one lived. A traveling preacher claimed the oak tree's bark bore the shape of a woman's face, mouth slightly open as if still speaking. Those who went near the house often fell ill, struck by fevers that no doctor could cure. Most chilling were the deaths. A group of boys dared each other to steal from the long-abandoned kitchen. Days later, one was found convulsing, his lips stained black, muttering about 12 shadows at the table. Another, a gambler who broke into the dining hall, was discovered in the woods, his body rigid, his hands clutching his throat as if invisible fingers had strangled him. And when a new family tried to settle the estate in 1861, they lasted less than a month. The father was found dead at the head of the table, his face locked in a silent scream. His wife fled in the night, barefoot, carrying only her children, babbling that she'd heard someone singing beneath the floorboards. The Civil War came, and soldiers marched past Fair Hollow, yet none dared claim it for quarters. Even in war, the dead house was left untouched, like a wound too deep to probe. And still the table remained, 12 chairs waiting, 12 goblets gleaming, though no hand polished them, each setting perfect, as though for a feast yet to come. Harriet's words became prophecy on every tongue. When the feast begins again, so shall I. By the late 1800s, the legend of Harriet's feast had become both fascination and warning. Folklorists scribbled about it in small-town papers, blending it with tales of witches and haints. To believers, Fair Hollow was cursed ground. To skeptics, it was an opportunity, a haunted house to expose, a superstition to profit from. In 1879, a group of men from Savannah rode to the estate. They called themselves investigators, though most were opportunists chasing fame. They brought lanterns, shovels, whiskey, and laughter sharp enough to mask their fear. The plan was simple: tear open the house, find the trick behind the tales, and sell what relics they uncovered. They began with the dining hall. The table was still there, untouched, 12 chairs drawn neatly in place. The air smelled faintly of iron and mold. One of the men, a journalist named Crowder, leaned close to the goblets, only to jerk back with a hiss. His lips were bleeding, though he swore he had not touched the glass. Another, emboldened, tried to break one of the chairs with his boot. The wood did not splinter. It groaned. Witnesses said it sounded like bone snapping, though the chair remained whole. The men laughed it off, but the laughter faltered when the lanterns flickered and refused to stay lit, as though the house itself exhaled against the flame. Unsettled, they moved to the cellar, prying open floorboards warped with damp. That was when they found it. A chamber dug into the earth, hidden beneath the foundations. At its center was another table, not wood, but stone. Upon it lay carvings too old to belong to the house, circles intertwined with symbols neither Latin nor English, etched deep as if clawed into the rock. And beneath the table, pressed into the dirt, were bones. Dozens, hundreds, too many to count. The men fell silent. Even Crowder, boldest of them, would later write that the chamber fell to live, as though the air itself was listening. One man swore he heard whispers rising from the earth, not in words he understood, but in a rhythm that pulsed like a heartbeat. By dawn, 2 of them were missing, their lanterns found at the edge of the woods, still burning. The survivors fled Savannah the next day, refusing to speak of what they had seen. Crowder's article was never printed. He burned his notes and drank himself to death within the year. And yet the table remained, stone and wood alike, waiting, always waiting. The turn of the century brought electricity, automobiles, and a new kind of hunger. People no longer feared ghosts in the same way. They sought them. Spiritualists, mediums, and scholars of the occult were drawn to Fair Hollow as though Harriet herself whispered their names across the decades. In 1921, a group of students from Atlanta College dared each other to spend the night inside the abandoned house. They brought a Victrola, a bottle of gin, and a copy of Poe to mock the darkness. By sunrise, only 3 stumbled out. One girl was missing her tongue, though no blood marked her mouth. Another boy could not stop muttering Harriet's last words, over and over. 12 chairs, 12 names, 1 table. The police dismissed it as hysteria, but the house gained a new reputation, not just haunted, but hungry. Then came the occultists. In 1936, a secretive circle calling themselves the Order of Ash set up rituals within the cellar. They believed Harriet had not poisoned her masters at all, but had bound their souls to the land through sacrifice, turning the table into a threshold. Their journals, later seized by police, claimed they had heard the feast stirring. When authorities raided the estate, they found the order gone. Only the table remained, set for 12, the goblets brimming with a liquid no chemist could identify. World War II slowed the fascination, but not for long. In 1954, a documentary crew arrived with cameras, hoping to capture America's most haunted house. Their reels were never aired. Of the 6 who entered, only one emerged, hair white as snow, eyes wide and ruined. She spoke once, to a nurse, before silence claimed her forever. She's still counting. By the 1970s, the county sealed the land, fencing it off and branding it unfit for habitation. But that did not stop the curious. Teenagers broke through. Thrill seekers dared each other to touch the able. Some returned sick, some never returned at all, and every report shared one detail in common. The table was never empty. The plates were always clean, the goblets always filled, the 12 chairs always waiting. It was as though Harriet's feast had never ended, as though the invitation was still open. Today, the ruins of Fair Hollow lie swallowed by weeds and vines. The oak still stands, gnarled and watchful, its roots clutching the earth like a hand that refuses to let go. The county posts warning signs, but warnings are only bait for the curious. Every year, people slip through the fence. Some come back with shaky laughter. Some never come back at all. Locals say the house breathes at night, that if you stand outside long enough, you will see candlelight moving through the windows, flickering like shadows dancing at a dinner that has no end. Hunters swear they hear music drifting from the walls, violins, faint but steady, like a waltz played underwater. And if you are bold enough to press your ear to the door, they say you can hear it, the scrape of forks, the murmur of voices, the low hum of a table that remembers. But the most unsettling part of all is this: the table does not always seat strangers. Survivors who fled long ago claim to have glimpsed their own fathers, brothers, or sons seated at Harriet's feast, pale and rigid, raising goblets they did not wish to lift. The feast, it seems, takes who it wants. And then there is her voice, soft, patient, waiting. 12 chairs, 12 names, 1 table. Some folklorists argue that Harriet's curse was never about vengeance, that she was not just a servant with bitter herbs, but a conduit, that the land itself used her hands to speak. And if that is true, then her warning was not just for those men in 1847. It was for anyone who ever sat down to a table built on cruelty, silence, and blood. So ask yourself, as you sit before your own table tonight, who built it? Who paid for it? What was buried in the ground beneath your feet? Because if the legends are right, Harriet's feast is not finished. The chairs are still waiting, the goblets are still full, and when the 12th name is called, when the last seat is Taken, she will rise again, not as servant, not as victim, but as keeper of the table. And perhaps, just perhaps, your name is already on her list.